Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Colin Durish on the screen for the second presentation of today. Colin, if you're happy to share your slides directly, perfect. I'll let you move on then and continue to the second presentation. Thank you again for joining as well today.
Thank you, Anne-Sophie. So I'm going to give you a slightly different perspective, because I'm going to give you the perspective of someone working for a small company trying to engage with pharma. So I'm in a good position to be able to give you this perspective, because after a academic career in psychopharmacology, I joined pharma, initially working for Merck and then for Wyeth, which is now Pfizer, and then went on to start two small companies, which initially was Cerebris in 1995, where I was until 2004, and then more recently Pivotal, which was founded in 2004, Pivotal Products 2010. So what I'm going to do is give you some general principles about how small companies face problems and how they may solve these problems if they're trying to engage with pharma. And I'll give you specific examples from both companies, from both Cerebris and from Pivotal. And I'll also, with the Pivotal example, I'll continue the theme which Udo started about public-private partnerships, and particularly pre-competitive consortia, and how they can be very important. So the first problem that a small company has when trying to engage with pharma is there are a very large number of small companies, approximately 30,000, but there's a relatively small number of pharma companies who've got sales over 2.5 billion. So that's a ratio of about 600 to 1. The top 20 pharma companies by revenue are shown here. And these are what would generally be regarded as the major players in large pharma. So what does a pharma company like this want from a small company? Well, clearly, pharma companies are commercial operations. They are driven by sales. And they're always looking for new blockbuster compounds, which used to be defined as $1 billion per year. Now they're more interested in super blockbusters, which are over $2 billion per year. To achieve those sorts of sales, they want to be first to market with a product to treat an unmet medical need, or they want to have a new product that's got a significant advantage in an existing class of product. But that's not the only thing that they're looking for in a new product with a collaboration with a small company, because there are other drivers. Important drivers, for example, are the strategic fit. So what area, what therapeutic area does the pharma company focus on in particular? And then beyond that, what's the quality of the opportunity? How feasible is it to actually turn this discovery into a drug that can be sold? And then how competitive will it be if it's taken forward and reaches the marketplace? Another important driver is that pharma companies increasingly want to outsource their R&D to accelerate projects and also reduce their reliance on their internal resources. So again, this comes down to strategic fit. Can the small company provide R&D capabilities that the large pharma company doesn't have currently? So the ratio of 600 to 1, this large number of small companies trying to get the attention of a large company. First of all, do you in your small company have something that pharma wants? And even if you do, with this ratio of very small number of large companies to a large number of small companies, how do you get the attention of the pharma above the background noise with all these different companies trying to be heard by pharma? And if you have a project in your small company, to get the attention of pharma, where do you start? Who should you approach in a pharma company? How do you go about that? How do you convince a pharma company of the value of your project? And then how do you negotiate a successful contract, which is the outcome that you would want? So dealing with this process from the beginning, the way to start is to use desk research to identify companies that may be interested in your project. And as I mentioned before, different pharma companies will have different focus on different strategic areas and therapeutic areas. you might be able to identify gaps in their pipelines that your project could fill. Or you might find that your project would be complementary, or it might be competing with an internal project. In that case, the pharma company wouldn't be so interested. So it's important to do a lot of desk research to begin with. Perhaps something that can't be overemphasized is that it's really important early on to identify a champion, or even more than one champion in a pharma company, who will promote your technology, your product, or your program internally. Now, ideally, this would be a scientist, because in the end, these decisions tend to get made by scientists or clinicians, but your initial communication may be with the business development team of the pharma company. So, you know, the way to go about it initially might be to email or call to arrange an initial discussion, either face-to-face or in the current times, online may be more applicable. But once you get the initial discussions underway, the decision will be driven in an early stage collaboration by the science. So the scientists and the physicians in the pharma company will need to be convinced about your scientific rationale and the medical need for your discovery before there'll be any commercial engagement. Now, once there is then that convincing about the rationale achieved, then there will be engagement on potential for development plans, the market opportunity. So how can you help yourself in this process? Well, you can potentially organize conferences to discuss specific collaborations or a pre-competitive consortium. And I'll give you an example of how we've done that at Pivotal. Presentations at scientific conferences are also very valuable to get the attention of the scientists and the physicians in pharma companies. Pharma companies will often have many attendees at different scientific conferences. They'll often be presenting their own data, and that is a very valuable place to meet people who may be able to promote your project. My personal experience is that presentations at commercial or business development conferences are less useful. They yield fewer results, and often they're quite expensive to attend. Another important thing to do is to try and get your results published at an early stage in a high impact journal. And again, pharma companies will monitor these journals that they're interested in, and that publication may, first of all, initially get their attention and then convince them to have some discussions with you. So once you've convinced the scientists and clinicians in the company that you've got a project that's worth discussing, then you'll need to negotiate with them and have a commercial arrangement. The pharma company will then engage their business development and commercial and legal teams, who will have considerable expertise in contract negotiations with a small company. There are many different deal structures possible: out-licensing deals, R&D collaborations, joint ventures, pre-competitive consortia. And I'll give you an example of an R&D collaboration from Cerebras and a pre-competitive consortium from Pivotal. Now, in your small company, you're not likely to have commercial and legal expertise. So at this early stage, it's important to employ someone who has got that expertise. And you can often get someone who will work with you on a consultancy basis if you have got a limited budget to get the best deal for both parties. So I said I was going to give you some examples. So the two examples I'm going to give you are from Cerebras, an R&D collaboration on a 5-HT2C, serotonin 5-HT2C agonist for obesity. And then I'll describe a pre-competitive consortium that Pivotal ran to develop and validate experimental medicine models in psychiatry. So just a little bit of background about Cerebras. We founded Cerebras in 1995. It was the first neuroscience R&D company in the UK. It was founded by myself and other former employees from Wyeth. And because we had that pharma background, that was important for credibility with venture capital investors and potential pharma partners. Subsequently, the company was acquired by Vanguard Medica to become Vernalis, but that merger was facilitated by the validation of the Cerebras research projects through collaboration with pharma. And often, if you're looking at some sort of collaboration with other companies or even an acquisition, that sort of big pharma validation is crucial. So the collaboration with Roche, as it turned out, had a dual benefit to Cerebras of providing funding for R&D, but also commercial and R&D expertise from the pharma company. So to give you a little bit more detail on this, this project was a 5-HT 2C receptor agonist for obesity, which was a novel target at the time for an obesity agent, which would reduce cardiovascular side effects. It was originally, and again, this is another interesting aspect of the collaboration, the target was validated by Cerebras scientists collaborating with academic groups using transgenic mice, which were 5-HT2 receptor knockouts, which became obese. The results were published at scientific conferences and in highly cited papers, and this attracted the attention of pharma companies and the media. Cerebras then went on to identify potential partners through desk research, and the potential partners that we identified, we wanted to have a focus on obesity and diabetes due to the big unmet medical need and the commercial opportunity. And the advantage to the pharma company was that Cerebras was going to provide the expertise in serotonin, in both chemistry and pharmacology, together with patented IP, which would give the pharma company a competitive advantage. So Cerebras had discussions with several potential pharma partners, and this eventually led to signature of an R&D collaboration with Roche in 1999 that was subsequently extended in 2002. So that's an example of a R&D collaboration. I'll now give you an example of a pre-competitive consortium collaboration. And this was funded through pharma collaborating with Pivotal and also 5 academic centers. So a little background on Pivotal, a clinical research organization founded in 2004 to assess new drugs for psychiatric disorders and obesity. And the idea was to have validated biomarkers to help with target engagement and to determine efficacy of new drugs in experimental medicine studies. And the biomarker validation studies were funded by a pre-competitive consortium. Pivotal Products, founded in 2010, and that was to develop particularly digital products that could be used in the clinical studies that Pivotal was running. Subsequently, we've also developed digital products that are now used in primary care for depression. So experimental medicine, when we started Pivotal, was in its infancy. And the idea was that experimental medicine could help to improve the success rate of getting compounds from preclinical drug discovery into phase 3. A lot of compounds were failing when they got to phase 3 because we didn't have much evidence as to their efficacy at early stages. The early stage phase 1 was about safety, and we didn't find out about whether there was efficacy until we got to a relatively late stage. The idea of experimental medicine is to try and determine efficacy at an earlier stage and therefore kill compounds early if they weren't going to be effective in patients. Now, the problem is that because experimental medicine was in its infancy, the only experimental medicine models that were available were in academic units. And the problem is that this wasn't very valuable for pharma because they weren't validated. Pharma needed validated models, and the academic groups weren't going to get funds for validation from the academic funding bodies. So what we convinced pharma to do was that a cost-effective way to get validation was to have a pre-competitive consortium where they would share costs and results. We went about this by convening conferences with 9 pharma companies and 6 academic centers over a 2-year period. And in 2007, we established a pre-competitive consortium in experimental medicine with 5 pharma companies and 5 clinical academic centers. And that consortium then validated models that have subsequently been used by many pharma companies in their development programs for novel compounds. This shows you the companies who were involved: AstraZeneca, GSK, Lundbeck, Merck, and Pfizer, and the universities: Bristol, Cardiff, Oxford, the Institute of Psychiatry, and Manchester. So just to sum up then, there are a number of problems facing a small company trying to engage with pharma. First of all, it's the ratio, the large number of companies. How do you get heard above the noise? Do you have something that pharma wants? And if so, where do you start? Well, as I've said, the way to start is use desk research. Early on, you need to identify a champion in the pharma company to promote your technology. And also, very important, present your results at scientific conferences and publish your results in high impact journals if you can, to get pharma companies' attention. Once you've got a pharma company who's interested in your project, how do you negotiate the deal? Well, you won't have the expertise probably for commercial and legal, So there are many different deal structures. So my advice is to get a consultant early on who can provide that missing expertise. And I suppose my bottom line would be, I've given you 2 examples of successful collaborations. I could give you many more of discussions which led to collaborations that were not successful. And so it's very important that you're persistent. You will need persistence to achieve results to have a successful collaboration. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Colin, for this really interesting presentation. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Laura Ferguson.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me here today to speak. I mean, I have to say it's a real privilege, and it also kind of feels like coming full circle for me, because I was actually a JRF, an academic JRF at Christchurch College doing molecular evolutionary genetics when I kind of started my transition out of academia and into the world of sort of entrepreneurship and translational science. So it feels like a real privilege to be back in Oxford giving this presentation. I'm now in AstraZeneca in the business development organisation, and I support collaborations with external parties. Often they are very young companies or small companies, and that's really my area of interest. So I just thought I would start by saying that Big Pharma really is big, but fundamentally AZ is a science-led organisation, and it was really great just to hear the other 2 presentations, and I absolutely echo everything that Colin just said about the importance of science, and I'll just reiterate that again here, but all the pointers he gave were absolutely spot on from my perspective inside the company. So our kind of big vision and our big scientific vision is that we push the boundaries of science to deliver life-changing medicines to patients, and that really is exactly what we do. So we have 3 global R&D centres in Gaithersburg, Cambridge and Gothenburg, but we actually have an R&D presence in about 40 countries around the world. And our commitment to kind of raw basic science can be seen in our publication record, and it's really our science-driven approach that is at the heart of AstraZeneca's drug discovery and at the heart of our pipeline of new medicines. So you can see that last year we published 1,068 papers, and 138 of those were high impact papers. And I could just say at the front, actually, that a real kind of carrot for partnering with us would be if you approach us saying that there's something that we can do together that will lead to a publication or a high impact publication. That's something that would really be an incentive for us to get involved. So we know that we definitely can't do this alone at all, and to illustrate that, we have more than 1,400 active collaborations in 2020, and the Academic Alliances Office and who are also part of the BD team literally do hundreds of agreements every year, from CDAs, MTAs, collaborations, consortia, etc. So you can see that a lot of those are in Europe and the US, but we also have increasing numbers in Asia Pacific and in particular China. And we really do collaborate at every single level of the academic to company pathway. So again, to illustrate that, we have around 300 active PhD students shared with different universities, of which about 230 are in the UK. We also have numerous shared postdocs with academic institutions, and we take place in loads of these pre-competitive consortia that Colin was talking about. So I think I've put maybe 4 in place this year myself, covering everything from kind of ethics in clinical trials to use of animals in research to AI, etc. So we do get involved in these very basic science agreements. We also have specific umbrella academic partnering agreements, one of which would be the Blue Skies collaboration, for example, with the LMB, which really does what it says on the tin, which is proper blue sky innovative research. And then we partner with companies at all stages of development, from academics who are spinning out, and I'll mention a bit more about that at the moment, all the way through to early stage startup companies, growth stage companies, and of course big biotech companies as well. Udo spoke about the sort of changing face of what pharma is, and so I thought it'd be interesting to mention AION, which was something that I helped set up at the beginning of the year, which is a, well, it says here in the graphic, we are AION Labs, the future of pharma, and it's true that this really is the way that kind of pharma is going. So you can see there that this is a collaboration between 4 pharma companies, BioMedX, who help us source innovation, and the Israel Biotech Fund, and this is a accelerator based in Israel, specifically looking at the application of AI to drug discovery and development. And just if you're interested at the moment, their first call is out, which is on AI approaches to the design and discovery of biologics. But the best of the best in terms of the kind of partnerships that we're looking for are these long-term relationships with specific PIs in particular groups. And really, this is the kind of champion that Colin was talking about that you want internally. So I thought I'd just give an illustrative example of this, innovation in action, where we went all the way from a studentship to a spin-out. So in our clinical pharmacology and safety sciences group, they've been working for a long time with an academic in Cardiff, looking at the off-target effects of CRISPR. So we eventually got to having a joint PhD student, Felix Dobbs, and during the course of his PhD, he developed some great technology that the university decided that they wanted to spin into a company. So there was various ways in which AstraZeneca then was able to support this. So I helped put some contractual stuff in place that meant that the innovation could be exclusively licensed into the company. But there was also all this sort of additional value add. So, for example, the scientific collaborators in AZ want this to be the gold standard worldwide technology for measuring these off-target effects. So they were very happy to present the technology themselves at conferences and also to make introductions to KOLs and other people in the field. From my own personal network, I helped make introductions to various investors, and we also supported their application to the Illumina Accelerator. So I thought this was quite a good example of these relationships that really go all the way through. And I could give you a number more. And really, I have to say that these relationships with specific PIs that are built up over time really are the key to success. So how do you kind of access this land of milk and honey? How do you partner with us to get into the kind of position that Broken String managed to? First thing I'd say is take a look at our partnering pages. So I won't go through all these things now, but this is just a slide just lifted from our partnering pages. There is lots of information there about the way that we would like to interact with you. And just to build on some of the things that Udo and Colin both said, a really key thing to think about is the changing nature of disruption within the industry, and thinking very carefully about your technology and what it is and where it sits in these kind of windows of disruption and this kind of journey that pharma has been on, from small molecules to large molecules to DNA, RNA, cell therapies, and who knows what the future will look like. So thinking about whether this really does drive change in the organisation that you're thinking of partnering with now, or whether it will actually at the point that it's ready to hit the market, because that's what we really care about. And one thing that I'd also say very clearly is that a lot of the time we're approached with solutions that help us cut costs, which are obviously great. But what we really, really care about is things that affect quality, that help us be best to market, first to market, and give us the highest quality products that we can have. So how to work with us. This is just really some basic tips about how you can help yourself. So before you reach out to us, do identify the right contact. Is it a mentoring or a BD person or a scientist? Is it a question or a pitch or a collaboration? So if it's a scientist, as Colin said, there's a lot you can do. Do keep up the publications, we really care. Also look at our publication record and contact the authors directly. Presenting at conferences is absolutely brilliant. And think about who you're getting in touch with and the sphere of influence that they have. I wanted to flag the Open Innovation Programme. You can look at this if you just Google AstraZeneca Open Innovation, it comes up with this. Do take a look around. This is an amazing resource where academics can partner with us and get access to a whole load of assets that they can use for their own studies. And we've got terms around how we engage with that. So this is an externally facing collaboration programme where we share stuff with academics to partner. We've also got a very active mentoring programme, which is a great way in and a great way to talk to us. So it's called AZ Exchange. And just as an example of some of the stuff, that's a worldwide programme, but some of the stuff we're doing in the UK is very active relationship with Cambridge Judge Business School and various accelerators such as Panacea, Babraham, KQ in London and Start Codon. We partner with Lucy Cavendish College around supporting women into entrepreneurship. And we also have a NED training programme where if you are in the position that you have a new co and you would like a non-exec director with pharma experience, then you can get in touch with AZ, and we've got various people who've been trained up to help you in a kind of board role. So before you reach out to us, there's loads and loads that you can do to help yourself have the best chance. And the first thing I would say is just get your materials in order. So the key thing to remember is that whoever you send stuff to is likely to want to send stuff around internally, and they may be sending things to people that they haven't even met before. And it's very unlikely that, having been passed on a few times, you'll be passed back up the chain for somebody to ask a question. So the material you send to us needs to be really clear, and it needs to give us enough information to tell us exactly what the opportunity is. So ideally, I love receiving an email that has a short intro spiel with a short bit about who you are, a link to key publications, and an attachment of a PowerPoint deck that's got a really clear introduction about what the technology is, what the information is. You don't need to tell us that pharma is broken as your first slide. It's always quite funny when people do, but that's probably not the best way to make friends. And in terms of how much information to put into it, people are often reluctant to share data, thinking that that's their confidential information. Often it's not. Often the confidential information is how you got to the data. And really, the data is king. Colin is absolutely right that in the end, it's the scientists that make the decisions about whether they want to partner. So do give us enough information and enough data to be able to say a yes or no easily and give the right kind of answer. We typically don't want to move to CDA unless we know that we're going to progress discussions because we're concerned about contamination. And do just get in touch when you're ready. There's no rush. So during your contact, do communicate with us. Ultimately, everything comes down to relationships. We are big pharma, but ultimately it will come down to a one-on-one relationship with whoever it is that you're in touch with. So it's absolutely essential to have that trust and transparency. And partners should always be partners. So if you're working with a big pharma and you don't feel that you're being treated as an equal and as a highly respected partner, then just walk away, because the relationship really should be absolute partners. As you'll hear many times, I'm sure, there's always competition. Please tell us what it is and how you relate to it. Be very clear about what your innovation is. Be politely persistent. Colin's absolutely right. Often you won't get a reply for ages because everybody is already fully engaged in what they're doing, and they have to kind of make a little chink to think about your technology and how it relates. So do be politely persistent. If possible, use benchmarks. They're super helpful. And if you have a call with us, check who's on the call to make sure that you know how to present the technology. I'm just going to skip this slide actually in light of the time. And in terms of industry myths, there isn't endless funding. There's actually very small pots for external collaborations. And bear in mind that when you want to access funding, it may be that you talk to a company one year and access funding the next year in the next funding cycle. We're definitely not interested in taking your IP, and we care a lot about contamination and try to put firewalls in place where we can. Publication, as I said, is key, and we absolutely do want to recognise collaborators. But industry myths that are true, it takes forever. So be prepared for a very long haul. There are changing priorities. Things can be in one day and out the next. So be prepared for changing priorities. And you may find yourself in this elephant and mouse situation where there's one of you and 10 people from in the company. If you find that you're in that situation, definitely take it as flattery, because nobody has to be there. They want to be there. They want to hear about your technology. And also just consider that everybody, I think, will be kind and respectful and will understand the fact that you're not in the same situation, that your technology is at a much earlier stage. Final word of warning: talk early and act when you're ready. So do talk to us early. It is likely that as an early stage company, you get one chance to impress the big pharma. And if that goes badly, it's really hard to get a second chance until much later down the line. So do make sure that if you get to having a feasibility study, that it really does show your technology in the very best light. Give yourself the best chance of success. It's not a good idea to go after a completely different application for a brand new technology. So think about what gives yourself the best chance of proving to us that it's a great technology. And remember that AZ is part of the ecosystem. So, for example, investors do get in touch with us saying, what do you think of this? Should we invest in them, etc. So just be aware that the way that the collaborations go will be kind of information that, although it's confidential that you're working with us, that we are part of an ecosystem and people are interested to know how Big Pharma perspective fits into that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura, for this great presentation.